Hi and welcome. This is genealogy terminology. I just want to make sure that you keep your microphones muted, and if you ask questions, to ask in the chat box. My name is Cheryl Smith, and I'm a genealogy librarian at the Haggard Library. And Bethany Ross is going to be joining us also here and there, and she's going to be paying attention to the chats. Say hello, Bethany.
Hey there.
We I tell you, we had some fun looking for terms, and there are still going to be many more that we're not going to discuss today, but just wanted to touch on a few in where we found the information from. Have you had an old illness, unusual death, legal term, occupation, or other words you didn't know? We're going to discuss them, some of them, and where to find their meanings. For medical terms, you can find them in letters, death certificates, probate, wills, journals. Somebody might talk about it in a diary. City directory advertisements, those old ones used to have some illnesses and cures mentioned in the advertisements. And I also think about how a lot of them probably were not very good or trustworthy cures, but they were considered cures at one time. We will talk first about illnesses. Let's ask the poll first before we get too far. Bethany.
Okay, so, and I apologize in advance. I may not say all of these words correctly, but if you have dumb ague, what do you suffer from? Do you suffer from not being very smart or a type of malaria? You can put it in the chat. So if you have dumb ague, you suffer from not being very smart or a type of malaria. What do you think? Go ahead and type in the chat which you think dumb ague means. Okay, we'll give you, say, 30 seconds. We got one answer so far. And no Googling, no Googling. All right, 10 more seconds. All right, 4, 3, 2, 1, and the answer is a type of malaria. So thank you for playing, and now Cheryl will tell you a little bit more about the rest of these illnesses.
So dropsy has been used so much in books, even in romance novels and fictional novels, as well as in medical records, and it's just a swelling due to watery accumulation. It is probably a common word you have heard. Apoplexy, apoplexy, sorry. We just talked about this before, about pronunciation. I'm not good. So please forgive me whenever I mess up on pronouncing the word. That's also one of the reasons why I didn't make it in nursing. So it means a sudden change in the level of consciousness and loss of control of body movement. Dengue is an infectious disease with fever, severe pain in bones and joints, and found in tropical and subtropical climates. I've heard it in several of those old movies that took place, like Lawrence of Arabia and things like that. We've looked at dumb ague. We looked it up before. I said augie the first time I saw it, but it's actually ague. So, and it is a form of malaria, irregular attacks of fever without chills. I loved that we used filth disease for typhoid fever. There were some really unusual words or sentences, phrases that we used for what illnesses we have for today. Gout is still common. Sudden attacks of painful inflammation in small joints, particularly the great toe. I also think that that's kind of interesting that it would attack the toe. Ground itch. This is dew itch, toe itch, water itch. Itching of the feet caused by hookworm larvae burrowing through the skin. Thankfully, unless you're walking in water that's polluted by larvae, you may not get this, but and you have to be walking around barefooted. So if your feet start itching and you've been walking in the water, you might get it checked out. In one of the podcasts that I listened to, one is This Podcast Will Kill You, and the other one is Sawbones. They've both talked about hookworm, and it will make your feet itch and feel really weird afterwards just thinking about a hookworm in your foot. St. Anthony's fire, it's inflammation and gangrenous manifestations on the skin. Again, it's just one of those kind of funny names that we called it. Oops, I did it again. St. Anthony's fire instead of just inflammation. Hysteria may have been heard many times throughout the years because it's nervous condition most commonly found in young women. Middle Ages, it was believed to be caused by the uterus. In the Middle Ages, you will find that a lot of illnesses women had was hysteria, was not going to be anything like a man would have, or that they would believe a woman had any problems, or they would just blame it on, as they said, the uterus. Phossy jaw, this is a picture of what it would look like. Phosphorus poisoning. It's characterized by deterioration of the bone, especially in the lower jaw, and it was due to exposure of the phosphorus by workers in match factories. It does make me wonder, I guess they're working closely around the mouth area, and that's why it attacks the jaw. Wasting disease. It's just a chronic illness characterized by the loss of body weight, usually tuberculosis or cancer. So we're wasting away. And wet brain, which is alcoholic cerebral edema, retention of body fluids in the brain due to alcoholism. These are just a few of the illnesses that I found. We're going to talk about the cures and some other things, but we have a lot of dictionaries down in our genealogy center, and there are a few that are on medical terms. Like I said, these are just mentioned throughout census. Well, I didn't see them in census, but medical records and probate and wills, anything that might be something that may say why they weren't fit to, fill out their will or something, or it could be just that there's some medical records out there. Sometimes you can see a doctor's records from that time period. Cures. You want to ask the next question. Can't hear you.
Sorry about that. Okay. Bezoars, are they real or fake? You may have heard about them from Harry Potter or some other fairy tale. So the question is, bezoars, that's what's pictured right here. Oops. Are they real or fake? May have given the answer away on that one. Let's give you 20 seconds to put in the chat what you think the answer is. Okay. Answers are flowing in. Say 10 more seconds. All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yes, the answer is they are real. And in fact, this is one that pictured, well, I'll let Cheryl tell you more about what they are. I'll hand it back.
Okay. It is a solid mass found in the stomach of animals, and it was believed to be an antidote to poisons until the early 1900s. So what they did in Harry Potter was take a bezoar and stuff it down somebody's throat to try to, cure the poison. And the richer people would have the bezoar in these little pretty holders. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was going to say I found this picture on the Metropolitan Museum's website, and this is a bezoar stone with case and stand from the 17th century. So they would make these ornate containers that were supposed to amplify the medicinal effects of these rare stones that people would find. So, yeah, pretty interesting.
It still kind of, makes me think, well, I don't know if I want to swallow a stone from an animal's stomach, and then for them to figure out how to find that stone is also kind of an interesting situation, but it's kind of fun to think about that though at the same time. We may have heard of bitters. It's just a medicinal drink with, of course, a disagreeable taste, and it will contain alcohol. And it was used as a tonic or an alternative to meds. And it could even be an appetizer. But of course, bitters means that it was a bitter tasting. Most drinks seem to have alcohol mixed in with them no matter what. So they're out there. Now, calomel and chamomile are the next two. And I do get them kind of mixed up. I thought they were really kind of the same thing, but they're not. Calomel was a mercurous chloride, and it was a metallic remedy for syphilis and gastrointestinal problems in the 19th and early 20th centuries. The chamomile, I've seen it spelled without the H and with the H. It's two plants that have a gentle healing quality. They're a Spanish plant that can be used for colic and other ailments. The German plant is used for ailments, and also it can freshen the air. Then there's carbolic acid. This is a coal tar used for germicidal property. It was used to clean surgeries and rooms where sick were housed, was used to burn away infected tissue, internally used to treat typhoid fever, whooping cough, and dyspepsia. Now, in the podcast that I've listened to, they always kind of say if something is to be used for cleaning surgery, but also to be taken internally, means that one is probably not going to work as well as the other. but they would try anything to heal somebody. And so, well, look, it cleaned the germs, so maybe it would treat the typhoid or clear out the whooping cough. Who knows? But that's how things happened. Dover's powder is used for relief of aches and pains of fever patients, mixture of opium, ipecac, and milk sugar. Opium was to sedate, ipecac was to reduce fever, and milk sugar was to sweeten the taste. In a way, I kind of think of this like the bear powder that you can take for a headache sometimes. It's probably along the same line, except probably doesn't have opium in it. Who knows? But that's what it was just a powder to take. An earth compress is pretty much what it means, in that it was earth or clay applied to an affected area and then covered with cotton or wool and bandaged to hold in place. It does make you wonder why an earth compress would be put on an affected area, because you would think that that would infect it worse. But that's the way it was in the early days. They tried anything. The emetic and vomitory, that's probably something we can figure out by the word, because if you know a little bit of Latin and roots of words, it's for vomiting. And what this does is to stimulate vomiting, because it was believed that the impurities would be expelled from the mouth and vomiting would get rid of the impurities. Firing is treatment for the neurology and spinal irritation using an iron disc that had been heated with boiling water and rapidly passed over the skin to cause blistering. This is like cupping, and we've seen that in the Olympics when Phelps did it on his back. So there's this way of relieving pain by using the heat. The oil of whelps, I'm thinking that's how you pronounce it. It was for gunshot wounds in the 16th century. I'm sad to say that it's a mixture of newborn puppies, worms, and turpentine. Turpentine was used a lot in the early years, the 16th, 17th century, to try to cure things. And I guess they would just test whether, I just don't know how they decided newborn puppies would be used.
Well, I'm happy to say I could not find any images of this. So definitely no longer in use.
That's good to know. Revulsion. Now, this is funny to me, because whenever I stopped to look at it, I was like, what can be a cure that's called revulsion? But it's where blood is withdrawn from one part of the body and moved to another to divert the disease. So if your right arm was causing you problems, they take blood out of the right side of your, in your arm and move it over to the other side to get rid of it or balance it. Hopefully, by moving it to both sides, that would even it out and flesh out the problems. Soap. Okay, everybody thinks, I know what that is. Well, as I was reading through the book, I thought this was kind of interesting. Oops, did I do it again? I keep moving my cursor, and that's why I moved the slide ahead. I'm so sorry. Soap, compound of oils or fat with alkali, used for cleansing, usually with rhubarb, used internally as a laxative, antacid, prevent kidney stones. Externally, to heal sores and cure the itch. Soap clysters is a liquid injection for constipation. Pharmacists used it to make pills, and it was used through the first half of the 20th century. So there's a few things here about soap in the definition, in that, yes, it was used for cleansing, but it could be used internally as a laxative, an antacid, externally to heal sores and cure the itch. Now, those things I can understand because, soap is supposed to cleanse, and hopefully it cleanse your sores. But you could also take it as an injection to cure constipation. So it was used quite a bit. And then it's so funny because it said it was used through the first half of the 20th century. So what do we use today? Ha ha ha. Sorry. All right, let's go on. Some of these you may have heard. Again, some of it comes from movies, from books. I've seen the term evil eye often, where somebody has the power to give you the evil eye, the look to injure somebody. And then there's Gesundheit, which was to prevent a person from sneezing his soul out and drive away evil spirits with that explosive breath. A granny woman is just another woman for, another definition or a way of saying a woman who practiced folk medicine from the Appalachia. Sometimes it could be a midwife. I think of this a lot of times when the Waltons is what comes to my head, because there were women up in the mountains that would heal their kinfolk and didn't want the nurse to come in and help take care, because they had their granny who could fix them with their folk medicine. Hand equals 4 inches is a unit of measure. Helper, herb, and yarb is just plant used for remedies. I just like that there's so many different types of terms for the plant. It could be a nutritional additive and also seasoning or coloring. So it was used for a lot of different things. And then we have the juggler, which can also be a medicine man. This was the Native American using sleight of hand to provide observers with performances, supposedly reflecting powers of healing skill. So they would just be, using kind of a magic and fool people into thinking maybe that they're healed by that sleight of hand. It just kind of cracked me up that fleshy part of the body posterior to hip joints or the buttocks was called nates. Royal touch is the victims of scrofula, king's evil, in the young characterized by enlarged glands and breakdown of bony tissue, a form of tuberculosis, sought cure from the kings of medieval England and France. Medieval times just did not believe in good old medicine. They believed in superstitious type of things like being touched by the king or drinking the water he washed his hands in would be a remedy. And it was used throughout the 18th century. So royal touch kind of just cracks me up. It's that there was something like that we had to have. Branks, that's the picture on the side there. It reminds me of the contraption I use for my CPAP, except that right in here is a piece that goes over my nose to help me breathe. But this is a medieval instrument placed on heads of argumentative women to muzzle behavior. In medicine, it was used for mumps. So I don't think so. But hey, it's one of those that I found that was just funny. Humors. Have you ever heard of the term humors? This is from Hippocrates, and we'll talk about them through a few slides. Black is for melancholy, to be from the spleen or the stomach. Yellow is to be from the liver. Blood is from the brain. And then phlegm, well, from the brain. And that's how they were able to decide in those early days what you were sick with. If you're a melancholy, that your spleen or stomach were messed up and that you needed to take care of them. And you may have to drink yellow fluids or do something for the liver problems. And really, there's a lot here to explain. And we really didn't go into this, but I just wanted to bring it up. The podcast, Sawbones talks about it, and they do kind of make fun of it. And but it was in the very early years, Hippocrates and was one of those that believed in them a lot and how to cure people. Let's talk about occupational terms. There's census that you could find them mentioned, city directories. In those early city directories, they will mention an occupation often. In the diaries, of course, legal records and court records. There may be other places. Also, I didn't, the city and town minutes might even mention some of the things that are listed in our occupations. It's a little harder to just find the terms. We do have an A to Z dictionary of genealogy terms, and then there's another 2 books that are just all kinds of terms, very general. And it's a very thick book. And I looked A to Z and tried to find one that would be an occupation versus just a general term. So it was kind of hard sometimes to find them. So I'm going to probably mess this one up. Accoutreurs is what I would say. Maybe it could be pronounced a little different. And this is the manager, overseer, or agent. I don't know where they picked up the term accoutreurs and why. I mean, manager seems like it should be a very easy term, but that's always what kind of cracks me up about some of the terms. Where did they get some of them from? Regulars are the properly qualified physician, conforming to mainstream medical practice. They are graduates of medical schools. And we have to remember the medical schools were not like they are today. And they had clinical practice and laboratory training. So they are the doctors you should trust. And so when you see something, sometimes the regular advised what medicine to take. So to me, that would mean I'm going to trust what they say. An empiric or quack is the healer who learned the trade through apprenticeship with the botanical practitioners or simply through experience. So they're probably not the ones to always trust. They just, tried these plants and said, it's right, this is what to do. Sometimes when one of the big quacks that I think about is in Pete's Dragon, and he wanted to cut up a dragon because he knew the parts of the dragon would help him cure people. He also would be making medicines that would cure all. And so by mixing all kinds of different things together, plants and alcohol and plants and alcohol. But so that's the first quack I think about. I know that there are many others in other movies or books that you've read, but that's the one I think of. A courier is a craftsman who takes the tan animal skin and highly polishes it and makes it more supple. So he's just one of the steps of tanning animal skin. Then there's the dike grave. Kind of can understand what this is in that in Holland, it's the man responsible for maintaining the dikes and seawalls. But in England, it's the man that maintains the drains and ditches and sea banks. Rounder, I find kind of interesting because it kind of makes sense. It's a cowboy who rounds up cattle and so that they can travel or receive care. But it also can mean a Methodist minister. So maybe they're rounding up the sinners, and who knows. But I just thought that was kind of interesting that we go from a cowboy to a Methodist sinner. Methodist minister. Sorry. A snow warden. Now, this I would say would show up in city minutes, that the snow warden has come out to care for the snow, keep the streets covered and even, in order that the runners of sleighs could move easily. And what I read is that they would move, maybe a mile or two outside of town. I mean, that's how far out that they would go to make sure that all the snow is level. So it's was an important job, and we still have, snow wardens in a way today, but they had to depend on oxen and big old wheels. We have to depend on machinery today. A duffer is a peddler or hawker of cheap or trashy goods. A knacker is someone who makes harnesses, buys old horses, and sells them for dog meat, or buys and wrecks old houses and sells the parts. We still kind of have knackers today, don't we? A turnkey is somebody who worked for the sheriff by tending to the needs of the prisoners, caring for the keys to the locks of the prison, and anyone now, today, it's anyone working about the courthouse or jail who has authority over prisoners. So we still kind of use the term turnkey. Yes.
And Cheryl, I was just, looking at some of these words, and, courier, of course, I thought of courier and Ives.
Yes.
And so isn't it true that with occupations, sometimes you might find that a family member's last name kind of alludes to what their family may have done, back in the day.
That's true. That's true.
And some of these I already looked up. Like I found someone named Duffer. I found someone whose last name was Knacker. So, just something to keep in mind when you're doing your genealogy. You might just investigate your last name a little more.
Very good. Thank you. That's a great thing, because it is true. We're Broom for our last name, and I didn't always find an occupation, but I wonder if our first occupations for the Broom family, that they made brooms. But that's a true, you're right. Thank you for bringing that up. I wonder if some doctors are called quacks today. No, sorry. Okay, legal terms. Court records and probate, wills, census, diaries, city minutes, just minutes and other legal records that you could even think of. There's just so many terms. And in this one, we got a lot of the terms from the Black's Law book. And it gets updated over the years. And we have in our collection some of the older editions because some of the terms that are mentioned there are no longer mentioned in today's Black's Law because they're considered out of date. But you'll read something and you're like, what? And so using Black's Law is a great place to get the idea of what it is. So I chose a few terms that I always get messed up, whatever. And then some that I just found kind of interesting because I have heard chattel for some women in those early books. And, they treat them as chattel, as they say, or even just any human could be a chattel, but also it's an article of personal property. So it could be a cow or a horse, but it's just an article of personal property. And so it is kind of a sad term whenever it was used in the early days. A plaintiff is the person who brings a legal action. This is I just always get that term mixed up. It's the one that wants to sue the other person or take the other person to court. Then there's grantor and grantee. So one is the person selling or giving the real estate person purchasing or being given real estate. So one is selling and one is getting or purchasing. And dower, I did it again. I told myself in my notes, just so you know, to not move my cursor over, and of course I still do. Dower or dowry is the right of a wife to life estate in her deceased husband's property. So it's the estate that she brings or she gets from, boy, I'm getting this one messed up. It's her things that she brings to a marriage. And sometimes it's money, sometimes it's just clothes and the towels. And, you hear of the women making quilts for their dowry. And so that's what this picture is just showing, all the things that she probably gathered besides money. And probably her father has the money and she has the clothes that she's made. The executor and the testator is the person appointed by a testator in a will to carry out the directions. And then the maker of the will is the testator. Boy, I probably messed that one up. So one makes the will and one carries it out. So my dad is making the will and my brother's going to carry out the directions from the will. Tort is injury to one person for which the person who caused the injury is legally responsible. It means negligence, slander, fraud, and libel. Those are all kinds of tort. Somehow or another, you injured somebody and you're legally responsible. Probate and wills, these we've heard all the time. Probate is the official validation of the will. There will be accounts, records, minutes, packets, and inventory. And the will is the instructions on how to dispose of the estate. And hopefully you can find a will so that the probate goes easily. Because in the will, they'll say who's the executor and the testator and give all the information. And then the probate, the court reads through it and says, yes, it's real and acceptable and it will go easily. Except if, of course, they owe a lot of money, and it can carry out over years in the documents. That is a whole world in itself, because of so many things that can happen. But probate and wills can give you so many tidbits of information. Because if you get one of their packets, all the pieces of paper that were used for the probate are in that packet, and it's nice to see little pieces of paper that might just have the answer you want. Caveat is a written document filed by an interested party to stop the process of obtaining a grant until opposition can be heard. Now, I should have looked this one up. Abramond is, may not be pronouncing that, but it's murder fully approved. To me, that means murder. But there's a word that they used in the early days called Abramond. I thought that was kind of interesting. A butt or a buttle, you probably have heard this. I mean, we still use some of the terms today, but I just found it interesting just to remember. It means to adjoin or border land, estates, farms. It's the boundary boundary where one's land joins another. So it just, they're connected to each other. Additur is increase in amount of money awarded by judge over amount decided by jury. So the jury says, charge him $100, and the judge says, nope, we're going to charge him $1,000. So he increases the amount to be awarded. All right. General terms. They can be anywhere. They're probably something that you see in just so many different places. Town meetings and newspapers and court records are just some of the places that you might find these terms. You could also, again, find them mentioned in books, nonfiction and fiction. Our first term is very interesting. It's called a cucking stool. And you can see a lady is tied to a chair. This is a form of punishment where a person is strapped into a chair and fellow citizens pelt him or her with objects, call her names, or dump water on him. They may even dump him in the water. So it's a way of punishment. I thought Dempsey, if that's how you pronounce it, I found that kind of interesting. It's twilight. I don't think I would have ever thought to use that, but sometimes whenever I'm doing crossword puzzles and it asks me for a term like, what does twilight mean? And, or, you want to use it in a crossword puzzle, and I'm like, twilight? What else can it be? Oh, it's Dempsey. Who ever heard that? Anyway, it's just kind of funny sometimes when there's words out there you're just like, never knew that was a word. Plank road pretty much says means what it means, and it could also, show up as kind of an occupation because it's laying the road made of milled lumber, usually on the right side of the road going into town, in order that farmers would have an easier going with the heavy load. So you might just see it on one side or the other, and because of, like they said, for farmers coming in on with heavy loads. That sure makes sense. In Plano, in the early years, the firemen, we didn't have plank roads, and the firemen could get stuck in the mud trying to get to a fire because there were no paved roads. And if it was muddy after a rain, they got stuck and depended on the horses to pull them out or along the way. So a plank road would have been really nice. Slinger. This is someone who steals cloth, yarn, and etc. with the idea of making it into something to market it. That was another one of those, who'd ever thought slinger was used? And it seems like that was a good idea, that they would make something out of the yarn cloth that they stole. A slip down is slightly curdled milk. Again, that's kind of interesting. Where do you get slip down for curdled milk? A tyke is an old horse or man, corn, or common dog. So tyke might, when you see it, in a sense, you may have to read the paragraph to figure out if they're talking about a dog, a man, or corn, or horse. Simlins is white squash from the South, Mid-South, or Midwest. I just thought that was kind of an interesting term for white squash. We are actually coming to the end. Is there any terms? Well, no, I shouldn't say that, because I may not know, or we would have to, because I didn't bring the books with me to look them up. But have you found anything of interest or run across a term that you discovered you want to tell us about? I love to hear old words. It's just kind of one of those things that what? Yeah.
Okay, pellagra. Let's see if I pronounce that right. Pellagra. Okay. A disease marked by dermatitis, gastrointestinal disorders, and mental disturbances, and associated with a diet deficient in niacin. So this is probably something that people still suffer from, and they still treat. We may still use that word,
or a form of it, because it does sound like it's got several different illnesses that it can mean. So
that's a good one.
Wow.
Okay, let's see. So yeah, I think death certificates are a great place to find unusual words. And if you can make out what the resident wrote, then you are very lucky, because
right.
that's part of the battle.
Yeah, and you see that two L's, one L, A, E, either one, I can see and understand why it could spell several different ways. And that happens a lot, because up to probably the 1950s, we spelled a lot by sounding out. So that's why there's a lot of words that are misspelled over time. Anybody else have another term that they've come across? It would be interesting to see one of our medical books that we have what it says further on the term pellagra.
It probably would give more background. Yeah.
All right, I just want to talk to you about a few, like medical miscellanea and genealogy and the law, and we use those, but the A to Zax, I said A to Z, but A to Zax, and what did they mean by that, and more, what did they mean by that? Those three, the medical and the A to Zax, and what did they mean by that, really give you so many different words to look up. And all of them are in our collection at the Haggard Library. And, we do fall back on internet and Google a lot, but the books do help a lot of times because sometimes it's a very old term, and it may help to come look it up in the book. The podcasts really help a lot with the medical terms and understanding the history of some of the things. They're also, the Sawbones is funny, listening to the early ones. And then this podcast will kill you. They get into the in-depth history and, science of the words or the illness, and tell you stories of the illness. And sometimes I can't make it through this podcast will kill you because it just gets too yucky, if that's a better word for it. I mean, it just makes, chills go down my back, and I'm like, yeah, I don't, I listened to the hookworm one and I was like, yeah, I don't want to imagine pulling a worm out of the bottom of my foot. So, I stopped listening to that one. But it is, they are fun. And, sometimes just reading about it or trying to find something is just not as fun as having them bring the stories or the information to life. So that's why I've remembered a lot, because of listening to their podcast. There are other podcasts out there. There are some legal podcasts so you can understand terms, and, so it's not something, and I've seen, dying from worms because they didn't know how to care for them. And, it's just, it is sad. And to think really up until the 1950s, when you hear these history stories, they were trying everything in the world to heal or cure things. And and that was also kind of what's amazing listening to that, is the things that the early people would try to mix together, like puppies and worms and, but it's all very interesting to read through. I spent days going through these books trying to pick just 10 for each of the categories, because there were some very interesting terms to go through. In September, we're going to in-person. We will not be doing Zoom any longer. So you will need to come to the Genealogy Center at the Haggard Library. In the next few weeks, you'll see the calendar for September and the times. our webinar. Oh, and look, we said upcoming webinars. Need to change that. Sorry. Upcoming classes. Did not catch that because we've been using webinars now for 2 years, a year and a half now. But the classes are for an hour and a half, and they will be in person, but downstairs in the Genealogy Center, there's a program room there. And we're going to, these are the 2 classes, DNA Basics and Introduction to Genealogy. And each month there will be classes offered. In October, we're going to have 4 because we have the lock-in, and it's the 3rd Friday. So, and which sounds like it should be like the 20th, but it's the 15th or something like that. It's the 3rd Friday because the 1st Friday is like the 1st. So I think that's why it seems odd to be the 15th. But we'll be having a lock-in, which means you can come and stay all day till about 9 o'clock Friday night and see all kinds of presentations and meet all of us and try to do your research, and we'll help with maybe breaking down a wall, a brick wall, who knows. But all of that will be in October. But each month classes will be offered just a couple of weeks out from the next month. So that's why I say any day now you'll start seeing our information about our September classes. Does anybody have any last questions? Want to know anything else? If you ever have questions, just remember to email us at genealogy. Sorry, let me start over again. Genealogy@plano.gov. And of course, you have to spell genealogy correctly. Don't forget it's E-A. I spell it E-O, and then for the rest of the day, I spell it E-O. We're really glad you came today. I hope you learned a few things. Good. Yeah, we're going to teach about how to make a book. We're going to have the lock-in. There won't be any registration. It's just come and go all day, but you'll start seeing our flyers and advertisement. There's 8 classes provided. They're recorded from across the U.S. actually, because we have one up in Washington, D.C. that's joining us. I forget where Judy lives, but she's just recording hers from, I think it's North Carolina or something like that. But anyway, it's very exciting, our lock-in. Well, I think that's it. If nobody has any questions, thank y'all so much for coming in today. Joining us today. We look forward to seeing everybody in person in September.